Hmm? Forgive me, traveler. I was lost in my own thoughts. You know, there are chronicles that reshape those who hear them. Songs that carry more than melody. Stories that serve purposes their audience never suspect. Tonight, I must speak of a different kind of warfare. One fought not with swords or spells, but with carefully chosen words woven into tradition so skillfully that lies become indistinguishable from truth. What unfolds takes place in the Singing Sword, where master bards gather to confront a terrible realization. Their greatest strength, the ability to reach people who trust no official source, has been turned against them. The cult has learned to weaponize culture itself, planting false traditions that reshape communities from within, making tyranny seem natural and resistance seem like betrayal of cherished values. Listen closely now to this chronicle of The Bard's Tale, where performers become cultural warriors, where documentation fights deception, and where the battle for hearts and minds proves that sometimes the most dangerous lies are those wrapped in the comfort of familiar song, and the most powerful resistance comes from those who help communities remember what they're in danger of forgetting. The Singing Sword Tavern in Baldur's Gate had always been a place where stories were traded like currency, and songs carried news faster than any mounted messenger. Tonight, the establishment's main hall thrummed with anticipation that had nothing to do with the quality of the ale or the evening's entertainment. Master Bard Catalina Threstrings had requested the attention of her colleagues for a performance that was more than entertainment. It was intelligence gathering disguised as art. The tavern itself was a testament to bardic tradition, its walls lined with instruments from across the known world, and its rafters hung with banners bearing the signs of performer guilds and traveling companies. Every surface seemed to hold some reminder of the stories that had been told here, the songs that had been sung, the news shared by those whose profession required them to move between communities like seeds carried by the wind. Catalina stood at the room's center, her traveling cloak thrown back to reveal practical, yet elegant clothing that marked her as someone who valued both function and appearance. Her lute was a masterwork instrument, whose mother-of-pearl inlays caught the lamplight in patterns that seemed to shift and flow with the music they produced. "Friends and colleagues," she began, her voice carrying easily to every corner despite the lack of obvious amplification. "We live in times that test the boundaries between truth and falsehood, between news and propaganda, between stories that inform and those that deceive. Tonight, we gather not just to share entertainment, but to separate wheat from chaff in the information flowing through our networks." The audience consisted of perhaps 30 individuals, all practitioners of the bardic arts, but representing wide variety of specializations. Traditional storytellers whose repertoires included epics passed down through generations. Court musicians who moved in circles of power and privilege, carrying messages that could never be committed to writing. Traveling performers whose roots took them through regions where formal communication networks did not reach. Street singers whose audiences included everyone from noble children to criminal masterminds. But despite their diverse backgrounds, all shared common understanding of the role information played in their professional lives. Bards had always served as an informal intelligence network, carrying messages between communities through performances that seemed like simple entertainment to casual observers. However, the Cult of the Dragon had begun to understand and exploit this network, planting false information in songs and stories designed to mislead those who opposed them. Worse, they had begun recruiting bards whose talents could be used to spread propaganda and disinformation that was far more effective than crude attempts at magical domination. "The challenge we face," Catalina continued, "is not just identifying false information, but understanding how it's being used to shape public opinion and behavior. The cult's agents are sophisticated in their methods. They don't simply spread obvious lies, but subtle distortions that lead people to draw incorrect conclusions from accurate facts." She gestured toward a young man near the front, someone whose nervous expression suggested he had news he was reluctant to share. Marcus, you've been traveling the northern routes. What have you observed? Marcus stood slowly, his hands fidgeting with the flute case he carried as a mark of his profession. There's a song making the rounds in the smaller villages. A traditional sounding ballad about a great king who unified the land through strength and wisdom. But the verses describe political policies that sound suspiciously like the cult's talking points, disguised as historical narrative. How widely has it spread? I've heard it in at least a dozen communities, always performed by local musicians who swear they learned it from their grandparents. But I've been collecting traditional songs from that region for years, and I've never encountered this ballad before. Someone has created a very convincing fake and seeded it into oral tradition so skillfully that people believe it's ancient. The revelation sent a murmur through the audience, and other bards began to recognize similar patterns in their own experiences. A drinking song that promoted the virtues of strong leadership over democratic decision-making. A lullaby that taught children to trust authority figures without question. A romantic ballad that portrayed independent-minded women as tragic figures who had brought suffering upon themselves and their families. The technique is brilliant, observed an older woman whose elaborate dress marked her as someone who performed primarily in wealthy households. By disguising political messages as traditional culture, they make opposition seem like an attack on cherished values rather than legitimate disagreement with policy. And by using our own networks to spread their messages, added another voice, they turn our greatest strength, our ability to reach people who don't trust official sources, into a weapon against the communities we serve. Catalina nodded, her expression showing both admiration for the enemy's cleverness and determination to counter it. Which brings us to tonight's main purpose. We need to develop methods for identifying and countering these false traditions while protecting the authentic oral culture that is our heritage. What followed was a detailed examination of specific songs, stories, and poems that had been circulating through bardic networks over the past several months. Each piece was analyzed not just for its content, but for its structure, its apparent age, and the patterns of its distribution. Gradually, a picture emerged of a sophisticated campaign designed to reshape popular culture in ways that would make cult ideology seem natural and traditional. Here's what's particularly insidious, noted a bard who specialized in children's entertainment. They're not just creating new material. They're modifying existing songs and stories in subtle ways. A traditional heroic ballad gets a few lines changed to emphasize the importance of obedience to authority. A folktale about clever protagonists outwitting powerful enemies gets rewritten so that the protagonists succeed through cooperation with authority, rather than independence from it. How do we counter something like that? Asked someone from the back room. If people believe these modified versions are authentic, how do we convince them that we're not one of the ones spreading the false information? We fight fire with fire, Catalina said finally. But we do it ethically. Instead of spreading false traditions, we help communities recover and preserve their real heritage. We document authentic versions of traditional material and make sure they remain available even when modified versions are circulating. She moved to a table where she had arranged several thick volumes filled with musical notation and text. I've been working with scholars from Candlekeep and other institutions to create comprehensive records of traditional material from across the region. Not just the songs and stories themselves, but information about their origins, their variations, and their cultural significance.
That's a massive undertaking, observed one of the court musicians. The oral tradition encompasses thousands of songs and stories with countless regional variations. How do you document something that was never meant to be written down?
Very carefully, and with great respect for the communities that created and preserved these traditions, Catalina replied. We're not trying to replace oral culture with written records, but to create backup copies that can help communities verify the authenticity of material when questions arise. The project she described was ambitious beyond anything previously attempted in the bardic community. Teams of performers would fan out across the continent, working with local musicians and storytellers to record traditional material in its authentic forms. The records would be stored in multiple locations to prevent their loss or destruction, while copies would be made available to any community that wanted to verify the accuracy of their own traditions. But the documentation project was only part of a larger strategy for countering the cult's propaganda campaign. Equally important was the development of new material that could compete with false traditions while promoting values that opposed the cult's ideology. Rather than creating obvious counter-propaganda, the bards would craft songs and stories that celebrated independence, critical thinking, and resistance to tyranny in forms that were genuinely entertaining and emotionally engaging. The goal isn't to preach to people, Catalina explained as she outlined the creative aspects of their resistance effort. It's to give them cultural tools that help them think for themselves and resist manipulation. A good song or story can be more effective than any sermon or political speech because it engages emotion as well as intellect. The discussion continued deep into the night, with various bards contributing their expertise to the development of strategies and tactics for cultural warfare. Musicians shared techniques for making new songs sound traditional, while storytellers explained methods for embedding complex ideas and narratives that seemed simple and entertaining. Most importantly, the gathering established networks of communication and cooperation that would allow the bardic community to respond quickly to new threats as they emerged. Rather than working in isolation, performers across the region would share information about suspicious material while coordinating their efforts to preserve and promote authentic traditions. As dawn broke over Baldur's Gate, painting the tavern's windows with golden light, the assembled bards began to disperse to their various destinations. But they carried with them more than just entertainment and news that marked their normal travels. They were now active participants in a struggle for the very soul of their culture, armed with knowledge and techniques that could help communities resist manipulation while preserving the traditions that gave their lives meaning. Catalina remained behind to organize the materials and commitments that had emerged from the night's discussions. The project ahead would require years of work and the cooperation of hundreds of performers, but it offered the possibility of creating cultural defenses that could protect communities from the kind of subtle manipulation that the cult practiced. As she packed her loot and prepared for her own journey, she reflected on the strange evolution that had transformed her from a simple entertainer into something approaching a cultural warrior. The bardic tradition had always involved more than just performance. Bards were teachers, historians, and guardians of the collective memory that defined their communities. Now, those roles had taken on new importance in a conflict where the battle for hearts and minds might be as crucial as any military campaign. The songs she would sing in the days ahead would carry more than entertainment. They would carry hope, resistance, and the accumulated wisdom of generations of people who had faced tyranny and found the courage to oppose it. In taverns and town squares, in noble courts and village festivals, the voice of authentic tradition would compete with the seductive lies of those who sought to remake the world in their own dark image. The Bard's tale was being written in real time, with each performance adding new verses to an epic that would determine whether future generations would inherit a world of freedom or a world of carefully orchestrated oppression. And in the quiet moments between songs, when audiences leaned forward to catch every word and every note, the true power of the bardic tradition revealed itself. The ability to touch human hearts with truths that could not be conquered by any amount of force or deception. And so, this tale draws to a close. Though its echoes may linger in your dreams tonight, the fire burns lower now. But don't despair. I have countless more stories waiting to be shared with you. If this tale stirred something within you, if it reminded you why magic still matters in this mundane world, then please, light your own beacon. That glowing thumbs up tells the spirits of story that our fellowship grows stronger. Subscribe to join our circle permanently, and ring that notification bell so you'll know the moment I return with new chronicles. The fire burns brightest when more souls gather around it, wouldn't you agree? Now if that's the case, share this tale with another weary soul who needs it, reminding them that adventure still exists. Tag a friend who would appreciate a good story by the fire. The more who believe, the more real these worlds become. And if you're new to our hearth, explore the playlist of chronicles that I've gathered. Tales of heroes and villains, love and loss, magic and mystery, each one carefully chosen for souls like yours. Until the fire calls us together again, may your own adventures be worthy of legend. And may you never lose the wonder that brought you here tonight. Travel or sleep well, brave soul. The long rest awaits your return.